The night the moon disappeared, the world forgot how to sleep. No silver light on the river. No glow above the treetops. No shadows on the red earth. Just darkness. Total. Complete. Unnatural darkness. The elders said they had never seen anything like it. Not in their lifetimes. Not in the lifetimes of their grandmothers. Not in any story passed down since the first fire was ever lit. But the children of Akyem village knew something the elders did not. They knew who had taken it. And they knew he had done it for the most dangerous reason in the world. Because he could. But that was just the beginning. His name was Anansi. And if you have heard stories before, and I believe you have, then you already know that name carries both a grin and a warning. Anansi was a spider. But not the kind you brush off your wall without a second thought. No. Anansi was ancient. Clever beyond measure. Half spirit, half trickster, and entirely too comfortable with both. He lived at the edge of Akyem village in the forest of Ghana, deep in the time when the world was still young and the boundary between the seen and the unseen was thin as morning mist. The village of Akyem was alive with everything a village should be. The smell of the wadawa and palm soup drifting from clay cooking pots at dusk. The sound of Kent looms clicking in the compound of the weavers. Children chasing each other through the narrow red dirt paths between the huts, their laughter rising above the drum of the evening beaters. Women balancing clay water pots on their heads with the kind of effortless grace that takes a lifetime to learn. And above it all, every evening without fail, the great round moon rising fat and golden above the forest like a lamp lit by God's own hand. The moon was everything to Akyem. Farmers read its shape to know when to plant and when to harvest. Fishermen on the great river read its reflection to know where the fish run deep. Mothers used its light to find their children when they stayed out too late. Storytellers, like the one speaking to you now, waited for the full moon to begin their tales. Because it is said that stories told under a full moon carry more weight, more truth, and more power than stories told in the dark. Anansi knew all of this. And Anansi had a flaw. His flaw was not greed, not exactly. And it was not laziness. Anyone who has watched a spider build a web knows they are anything but lazy. Anansi's flaw was hunger. A deep, insatiable, burning hunger, not for food, not for gold, but for stories. You see, in the beginning, all stories in the world belonged to Nyam, the sky god. Every tale ever told, every legend, every whispered history of every creature that had ever lived on earth, they all lived in a great sealed god in Nyam's palace in the clouds. Anansi had already outsmarted Nyam once, long ago, in a great contest of wits, and won the right to carry stories down to earth. And the people loved him for it. But Anansi was not satisfied. He wanted them all. Every last one. And one night, watching the great moon hang over Akyem like the most beautiful story never told, a thought crept into his spider mind. A thought that should never have been thought. What if, he asked himself, the moon itself is a story? What if the greatest story ever told is not in any god in the sky, but hanging right there above my head every single night? He watched the moon for 7 nights. And on the 8th night, he began to spin. The web Anansi spun that night was unlike anything he had ever made. It stretched from the highest sick cotton tree in the forest all the way up, thread by invisible thread, into the sky itself. A web of pure midnight silk, stronger than iron, thinner than thought, invisible to every eye except Anansi's own. It took him the entire night to build. By the time the first grey light of dawn touched the eastern sky, the web was complete. And Anansi sat at its center, 8 eyes gleaming, and he waited. That evening, the moon rose as it always did. Fat. Golden. Unsuspecting. And it rose directly into Anansi's web. There was a sound, just once. Like the entire sky drawing a single sharp breath. And then the moon was still. Caught. Anansi moved quickly, as spiders do, wrapping the moon in layer after layer of silk until its light dimmed and flickered and finally went out like a smothered flame. He carried it down to earth. Down through the forest. Through the dark undergrowth. All the way to his home at the edge of the village. And he hid it deep inside his compound, inside a great clay pot with a heavy lid. And he smiled. Because now he had something no creature on earth had ever possessed. He had the moon's story. What happened next still haunts me. The darkness that fell over Akyem that first moonless night was not simply the absence of light. It was the presence of something else. The river fish stopped running, as if the water itself had forgotten where to go. The crops in the field began to droop at the edges, their leaves curling inward like hands trying to hold something that was already gone. The cattle refused to leave their enclosures. The dogs of the village gathered at the edge of the forest and howled, low, continuous, without pause, all through the first night. The elders called an emergency gathering beneath the great odum tree at the center of the village. They threw divination shells. They consulted the ancestors. They poured libations on the red earth and called out to Niam in the sky. But Niam was silent. Because Niam already knew what had happened. And Niam was not silent because he did not care. He was silent because he was waiting to see what the world would do. On the third moonless night, a young girl named Abina, 7 years old, the daughter of the village weaver, could not sleep. She crept from her mother's hut and walked alone through the dark village. She was not afraid of the dark the way the adults were. Because she had noticed something the adults had not. A faint glow. Coming from Anansi's compound. Thin as a thread. Golden as old honey. Slipping through the cracks of a clay pot sitting at the back of his yard. Anansi, she said quietly, standing at the edge of his compound. What is in that pot? Anansi appeared in the doorway, all 8 eyes open, his expression perfectly composed. Nothing but fireflies, little one. Go back to bed. Abina looked at the pot. Then she looked at Anansi. And said nothing. But she did not go back to bed. She went to her grandmother. Her grandmother was the oldest woman in Akyem. So old that her given name had been forgotten by everyone, including herself. The village simply called her Nane Katoku, which meant, roughly, the one who arrived before memory. When Abina told her what she had seen, Nane Katoku did not react with shock. She nodded slowly. As if she had been expecting it. I know what Anansi has done, she said. I have known since the first night. I was waiting to see if he would return it himself. Why didn't you tell the elders? Abina asked. Nana Kotoku smiled, a long, tired, ancient smile. Because, my child, Anansi is not the real problem. The moon can be returned. But what worries me is why he took it. She paused. The darkness outside pressed against the walls of the hut. Anansi did not steal the moon because he is evil. Anansi stole the moon because he is lonely. And a lonely creature with great power, that is the most dangerous thing in any world. Abina was quiet for a long time. Then she asked the question that unlocked everything. Nana, what story does the moon carry? The old woman closed her eyes. The moon, she whispered, carries the story of every person who has ever looked up at it and felt less alone. Every child who ever cried in the night and looked out the window and saw it there, steady, unchanged, faithful. Every traveler lost in the wilderness who navigated home by its light. Every lover who sat with someone they cherished and watched it rise together. She opened her eyes. The moon's story is not a story about the moon. It is the collected story of every soul that has ever needed it. And Anansi, for all his cleverness, does not understand that you cannot own a story like that. You can only be part of it. I didn't understand it then. But I do now. Abina went to Anansi's compound alone. In the dark. In the middle of the night. She sat cross-legged in front of his door and she waited. After a while, the door opened. Anansi looked down at her, all 8 eyes narrowed. You again. I know you have it, Abina said simply. And I know why you took it. Anansi said nothing. You wanted its story. Because you collect stories. Because stories are the only thing that make you feel real. A long silence. Then, quietly, unexpectedly, Anansi sat down on the earth across from her. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, the great trickster said nothing clever at all. How did you know? Because I feel it too sometimes, Abina said. Like if I could just hold on to a story long enough, keep it just for me, then I would never feel empty again. Anansi stared at her. This small human girl. 7 years old. Sitting in the dark without fear. Seeing him more clearly than anyone had in centuries. The moon's story doesn't work that way, she said gently. My grandmother told me. You can't own it. The moment you put a lid on it, it stops being a story. It just becomes a secret. And secrets don't shine. The darkness around them seemed to hold its breath. Anansi looked at the clay pot sitting in the corner of his compound. He looked at it for a very long time. And then he rose, crossed to it, and lifted the lid. The light that burst out was blinding. It flooded the compound. It flooded the village. It rose upward through the forest canopy like water rushing back into a place it had always belonged. And above Akyem, above the odom tree, above the river, above the sleeping fields and the restless cattle and the howling dogs who suddenly fell silent. The moon rose again. Full. Golden. Faithful. Home. The village of Akyem woke that morning to the moon still visible at the edge of the dawn sky, something that happens only rarely, and which the elders say is a sign of extraordinary grace. The river fish returned by evening. The crop straightened by the following dawn. The cattle walked out into the field as if nothing had happened, as if they had simply been waiting for things to be right again before choosing to move. Nobody in Akyem ever knew for certain what had happened. The elders debated and theorized and consulted their shells for weeks. But they never arrived at the truth. Only Abina knew. And Anansi. After that night, something shifted in the great trickster. He did not become simple or tame. Anansi was never meant to be either of those things. But he became something he had never quite been before. Generous. He began to share stories more freely than ever. Not just the ones he had bargained for and won, but all of them. He would appear at the edge of a fire, uninvited, and begin to speak. And the stories he told were richer now, more layered, more alive, as if something that had been locked inside him had been released along with the moon. Abina grew up to become the greatest storyteller Akyem had ever known. Some said it was because she had a gift. Others said it was because she had been taught, secretly, by the spider himself. But those who knew her best, who sat closest when she spoke, said it was because she understood something most storytellers never learn. A story held only by one person is just a thought. A story shared with the world, that is the thing that lives forever. Tone, deep, unhurried, final. Speak to every generation listening. There is a saying from the Akan people of Ghana that I carry with me always. Obinkia akodonaya. Which means, no one needs to teach a child about God. Meaning, there are truths so fundamental, so built into the fabric of the world, that even a child can see them clearly. Anansi was ancient, powerful, cunning beyond measure. And it took a 7-year-old girl with bare feet and clear eyes to show him what he had forgotten. That the things which make this world beautiful, light, love, story, belonging, are not things we can own. They are things we are invited to participate in. You cannot hold moonlight in a clay pot. Not because it is impossible, Anansi proved it was possible. But because the moment you do, it stops being moonlight. It becomes something lesser. Something trapped. Something that has lost its entire reason for existing. The moon was never made to be possessed. It was made to rise. Every night. For everyone. Without condition. And I think, if we are honest with ourselves, there are things in our own lives we have tried to trap in clay pots. Gifts we were given to share, that we have been hoarding. Light we were meant to pass on, that we have been hiding under our own rooftops. Stories that belong to the world, that we have been carrying alone. The great Anansi learned it from a child at midnight. Maybe we can learn it a little earlier. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. A story given away always comes back fuller than before. Just like the moon. Call to action. Tone, warm, unhurried, personal. Smile in your voice. If this story taught you something. About sharing, about light, about the stories we carry. Don't forget to subscribe to Tales Under Baobab. Every week, we gather beneath the great tree, and we remember who we are. And leave a comment, what is one story you have been keeping to yourself? The stories are waiting. Come sit with us.